You know Stranger Things, right? We all do. But what if I told you that show, the one that totally defined a generation, was almost never made? That's what we're doing today. We're going to peel back the layers on Season 1 and figure out exactly how the Duffer Brothers' rejected vision became an absolute global phenomenon.
So, it all kicks off with this number. Can you believe the original pitch for Stranger Things was rejected somewhere between 15 and 20 times? Yeah, network after network just kept saying no. They couldn't wrap their heads around it, you know? A show with kids as the heroes, but the story, it wasn't for kids. They kept pushing, hey, maybe shift the focus to the adults, like Chief Hopper. But the Duffer Brothers, they stuck to their guns. And thank goodness they did.
So what was this big pitch that everybody kept passing on? It was actually beautiful in its simplicity. Just this. What if Steven Spielberg directed a Stephen King book? That one sentence, man, it just perfectly nails the show's DNA, doesn't it? You've got that sense of wonder, that childhood adventure right out of a movie like E.T., but it's mixed with that creepy small-town horror, those dark supernatural vibes you get from a Stephen King novel. It was basically a love letter to everything they grew up on in the 80s.
Okay, so how exactly did they put together this whole Spielberg meets King dream? Well, ironically, the show really got its start because of another major rejection, one that actually kicked the whole thing off.
You see, before Stranger Things was even a thought, the Duffer Brothers were trying to get the rights to adapt Stephen King's It. But, they were pretty much unknown filmmakers at the time, so they got turned down. Flat. So they decided to, in their own words, pull a Spielberg. It's like a Spielberg couldn't get the gig to direct a James Bond movie, so he just went off and created Indiana Jones. The Duffers figured, hey, if they can't play in Stephen King's world, they'll just have to build their own.
And what's really fascinating is that the show we all know and love wasn't always going to be in Hawkins. The original working title was actually Montauk. It was supposed to be set on Long Island and based on some real-world conspiracy theories. But here's the thing. Shooting a show in the winter, on the coast, way too expensive. So they made a change. They moved it to the fictional Midwest town of Hawkins, Indiana. And that move, it didn't just save them a ton of money. It was kind of a stroke of genius. It grounded this wild, supernatural story in this super relatable suburban nostalgia.
But look, a perfect setting is really just an empty stage without the right people on it. And what truly brought Hawkins to life was its heroes. So let's get into how they found this absolutely perfect cast.
The number one thing for them was authenticity. It was absolutely crucial. Executive producer Sean Levy said they were not looking for those polished, perfect Hollywood kids. Nope. They wanted, and I love this quote, real-life oddness. And to find that, they had the young actors read lines from the classic 80s movie Stand By Me in their auditions. They were looking for that raw, genuine kid chemistry.
And wow, did they find it. Gaten Matarazzo, who plays Dustin, he was a total no-brainer. They cast him right after seeing his very first audition tape. And Millie Bobby Brown, she was there something special, an actress who could say so much without saying a single word. Then you have Winona Ryder, who brought that iconic 90s star power to Joyce. And David Harbour, he was just the perfect modern-day Chief Brody from Jaws. That flawed, reluctant hero that you just can't help but root for.
The depth they wrote into these characters is it's incredible. Take Hopper, for example. He's not just some jaded small-town cop. When you dig into the source material, you find out he's a Vietnam vet who was exposed to Agent Orange, and that exposure likely caused his daughter Sarah's cancer. And that little blue bracelet he wears all the time, that was her hairband. That hidden tragedy, that weight he carries, it fuels his entire journey. The search for Will Byers becomes so much more. It's his shot at redemption.
But hey, what's a hero like Hopper without a truly terrifying monster to fight? And that, of course, brings us to the creature that haunted Hawkins, the Demogorgon.
So, what exactly is this thing? Well, at its core, the Demogorgon is just a predator. It's from another dimension, it's drawn to the smell of blood, and this is the scary part, it can literally punch holes in reality to get to its prey.
The Duffer Brothers were really specific about what kind of monster this was, though. They said it wasn't a psychological threat, like Pennywise from It, who feeds on your personal fears. No, this was more like the shark from Jaws, just a primal, instinct-driven hunter. It's not evil, it's just hungry. And that distinction is so important because it makes the attacks feel less personal and more like you're up against some terrifying force of nature.
And bringing this nightmare to life was this really cool mix of old-school practical effects and modern tech. The design itself, heavily inspired by the creepy, biomechanical art of H.R. Geiger. They actually had an actor, Mark Steger, in a full-body practical suit on set, so the kids had something real to act against. That terrifying head, the one that opens up like a flower, that was an animatronic marvel, with CGI layered on top just to enhance the horror. So cool.
Okay, so we've talked about the show's main monster.
Now let's talk about an accidental icon. It's time to talk about the cultural explosion that was Barb Holland. This is honestly one of the biggest questions to come out of Season 1. How did this happen? Barb had what, maybe a few minutes of screen time total, and yet she became this massive fan favorite obsession. So how on earth did that happen?
I mean, her story is it's brutally short. She's a good friend, right? She's worried about Nancy, she gets dragged to a party she has zero interest in, tries to fit in, and hurts her hand. And then she's just abandoned by her best friend. A single drop of blood from that cut is what seals her fate. She was just so relatable, so vulnerable, and then she was just gone, unceremoniously killed off.
And I think that's the real key. In the show, pretty much everyone just moves on, like immediately. Hawkins' lab covers the whole thing up, says she's a runaway. But online? Fans were not having it. They erupted. They saw this character who was basically the voice of reason, the loyal friend, and she just gets forgotten. So the whole #JusticeForBarb thing, it wasn't just a funny meme. It was a real demand from the audience for the story to actually acknowledge its most relatable victim. All right, let's talk about the final, crucial piece of this whole puzzle, the terrifying world where Barb met her end. It's time we go inside the Upside Down. So, fun fact, in the writer's room, they originally called it the Nether, and the look of this dark, twisted mirror of our world was so carefully crafted. You know those creepy floating spores, the ash? That was directly inspired by the super atmospheric horror video game series Silent Hill. And the whole vibe, that hellish, surreal, decaying atmosphere, that came from the nightmare paintings of a Polish artist named Zdzisław Beksinski. And of course, the season doesn't just wrap up with a nice, clean victory. Oh no. It leaves us on this absolutely chilling note. Will Byers is supposedly safe, right? But then he goes to the bathroom, and for a second, he flashes back to the Upside Down, and he coughs up this nasty slug-like creature. Suddenly that victory feels super temporary. The infection has come home. And that's what leaves us with the big question, the one that defined that whole cliffhanger. The problem wasn't about closing a portal anymore. The new question was, what happens when the monster isn't at the gate, but it's already inside?